"You don't have to choose me, Samuel," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. "I'm not the kind of woman men keep." He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her the way a man looks at something he's already decided he won't let go. "Too late," he said quietly. "I already did." Eleanor Hayes had spent her entire life waiting for someone to realize she wasn't worth the trouble. She never expected the one man who proved her wrong would be the one she tried hardest to run from. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Montana Territory, winter 1881. The storm came without warning. 1 hour, the sky was the color of pale ash, cold and distant, but manageable. The next, it split open and unleashed something furious and white and relentless across the valley. Samuel Carter was in his barn when it hit. He heard the wind change pitch, a sound he had learned to respect after 20 years in this territory, and he pulled his coat tighter and secured the last of the feed bins and told himself he would get inside before it got worse. He was wrong about the timing. He was almost always wrong about the timing of things that mattered. He had just crossed the yard, head down against the driving snow, when he heard something that didn't belong to the storm. A sound, not the wind, not the creak of frozen wood or the groan of ice on the water trough. A voice, small, exhausted, just barely reaching him through the white noise of the blizzard. He stopped walking. He told himself it was nothing. The cold played tricks. He had lived alone long enough to know that silence could manufacture sounds that weren't there. He took 3 more steps toward the house. Then he heard it again. And this time he was certain. He turned. He walked back through the yard, past the barn, past the fence line, following something he couldn't name. Some instinct buried deeper than logic, older than reason. He went 50 yards into the dark before his lantern caught it. A wagon, off the road. One wheel cracked clean through. The horse, a tired, gray animal with her head hanging, stood still in the traces already beginning to shiver. And beside the wagon, sitting in the snow with her back against the broken wheel, was a woman. She wasn't moving. Samuel ran. He dropped to one knee beside her, and she startled a sharp, violent flinch, like a person who had learned that sudden movements usually meant pain. She pressed herself back against the wheel, and her eyes went wide, and she said the first thing that came to her, "Don't." Just that one word. Don't. Not help me. Not please. Not who are you. Just don't. Samuel held up both hands, palms out, slow. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "My name is Samuel Carter. My ranch is just up that road. You need to come inside." She stared at him. Her lips were pale. Her coat was thin, far too thin for a Montana winter, the kind of coat a woman wore in a place that didn't get this cold. Her hair was loose from whatever had held it, and the snow was settling into it, like she'd been out here long enough for the storm to start claiming her. "I'm fine," she said. Her teeth were chattering. "You're not fine," Samuel said. "You'll be dead in an hour if you stay out here." She looked at the horse, then at the wheel, then at the road, as if she was calculating whether she could walk to wherever she was going faster than she could trust a stranger. "My wagon." "I'll come back for the horse," Samuel said. "But right now, I need you on your feet." She hesitated. That hesitation, that specific kind of pause where a person weighs danger against danger and tries to figure out which one is smaller, Samuel had seen it before. Not in a woman lost in a snowstorm. He had seen it in people who had learned that accepting help was never free. "I don't need charity," she said. "This isn't charity," Samuel said. "It's a blizzard. There's a difference." She looked at him for a long moment. The lantern light moved between them. Then she reached out her hand. He helped her up. She was lighter than she should have been. She stumbled once, and he caught her arm, and she pulled back immediately. Even in that condition, even half-frozen a reflex, so practiced it happened before she could stop it. He led her to the house without asking anything else. Tug. Inside, the fire was still going. He sat her near the hearth, and she held her hands out toward the flames and didn't speak. He brought her a blanket, a cup of coffee, and a bowl of the stew that had been sitting on the stove since dinner. He set them beside her and stepped back. She looked at the food, then she looked at him. "What do you want for this?" she asked. Samuel frowned. "Nothing." "People always want something." "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight, I want you to eat before you fall over." She ate slowly, carefully, the way a person eats when they're not sure when the next meal is coming, but they've trained themselves not to show it. She held the cup with both hands, and the color started coming back into her face by degrees. Samuel sat across the room and gave her space. He didn't ask questions. He'd learned over a life that had handed him more grief than he thought a man could carry, that questions could wait. People would tell you what they needed you to know when they were ready. Pushing before then only taught them to close tighter. After a long while she said, "I'm Eleanor Hayes." "Samuel Carter," he said. "You said that outside." "I did." Another silence. The fire popped. Outside, the storm pressed against the house like it was looking for a way in. "I was heading to Billings," Eleanor said. "I have a cousin there. She said I could stay." "Roads are closed until this passes," Samuel said. "Probably 2 days, maybe 3. She received this information with a stillness that told him she was doing arithmetic in her head, figuring out something, measuring the cost of 2 or 3 days against whatever she was running from, because she was running from something. Samuel had lived long enough to recognize the signs. "You can stay here," he said. "There's a spare room. Door has a lock." He added that last part deliberately without looking up from the fire. He wanted her to hear it without making it strange. She was quiet for a moment. "I'll work for the room," she said. "You don't have to." "I will work for the room," she said again, firmer this time. Not a request, a condition. He looked at her then. She was watching him with something in her eyes that wasn't pride, exactly more like the last border of a person who had already given up everything else, and was holding this one thing with both hands. "All right," he said. "We can work something out." She nodded, once, and turned back to the fire. And Samuel Carter, who had eaten dinner alone for 6 years, sat in his own kitchen and felt something shift in the room that he hadn't felt in a very long time. He couldn't name it yet, but it was there. The next morning, he came downstairs to find breakfast on the table. Not the simple kind, eggs and coffee, the bachelor's meal he had eaten for years. Eleanor had found the flour, the salt pork, the dried apples he'd forgotten were in the back of the pantry, and she had made a proper breakfast. Biscuits still warm. Gravy. Sliced apples with a little sugar. He stood in the kitchen doorway and stared at it. "You didn't have to do this," he said. She was already at the wash basin. "I said I'd work." "I meant the fences, maybe. The chickens." "I'll do those too." She dried her hands. "You've been feeding yourself on plain eggs and boiled coffee for what, 3 years? 4. He almost smiled. 6. She turned and looked at him with something he couldn't quite read. Not pity, not sympathy. Something quieter than either of those. 6 years, she said more to herself than to him. Then she moved past him to collect the plates. "Sit down, Mr. Carter. It gets cold fast." He sat. He ate. For the first time in 6 years, someone had made him a hot breakfast. He didn't know what to do with that, except eat it. The storm lasted 3 days. In those 3 days, Samuel learned a few things about Eleanor Hayes without asking a single direct question. He learned she was thorough. She didn't do things halfway. When she cleaned, she actually cleaned. When she repaired the loose hinge on the pantry door, a task he had been putting off for 2 months, she did it properly with the right tools, not the quick fix he would have used. He learned she was watchful. She noticed things. When he came in from the barn with a cut on his hand from a broken fence wire, she saw it before he mentioned it and had the cloth and the alcohol ready before he sat down. She didn't make a production of it. She just handed them to him and went back to what she was doing. He learned she startled easily. Not at the storm, not at the sounds of the ranch. Those were sounds she seemed to find grounding the animals and the wind and the ordinary noise of a working farm. But voices raised, even just Samuel calling to the dog, made her go still for just a half-second before she caught herself. She thought he didn't notice. He did. He didn't say anything. On the second night, he found her standing at the front window in the dark watching the snow. He had come down for water. She didn't hear him at first. She was holding herself very still, not looking at anything in particular, just standing. "Eleanor," he said quietly. She turned. Her face was composed in an instant, the particular composure of someone who had learned to put their expression on fast, like a coat they kept by the door. "Sorry," she said. "I couldn't sleep." "You don't have to apologize for being up." She looked back at the window. "Sometimes I just need to see where I am." Samuel poured 2 cups of water, set one near her, didn't push. "My wife used to do that," he said. "Stand at windows." Eleanor looked at him. "Used to. She died 7 years ago." "I'm sorry." "So am I." They stood in the dark together, not really talking, not really not talking, just occupying the same space. After a while, Eleanor said quietly, "Does it get easier?" He thought about that honestly. "It changes," he said finally. "The shape of it changes." She nodded like she understood that. Like she knew grief in that particular form, not the sharp kind, but the kind that reshapes itself over time into something you carry differently, but always carry. "What are you running from?" he asked. He hadn't planned to ask it. It came out of the dark and the quiet and the standing at windows, and he couldn't call it back. Eleanor was very still. "What makes you think I'm running from something?" "The way you looked at me when I found you," Samuel said. "People who are just lost in a snowstorm look frightened. People who are running look like they're calculating." She didn't answer right away. "You're perceptive," she said finally. "I've just been alive a long time." Another long silence. "My husband died," she said at last. Not in a way that sounded like grief, more like she was reporting something. A fact. 8 months ago. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She said it flat and even. "Our marriage was not what a marriage is supposed to be." Samuel waited. "When he died, his brother decided that everything my husband owned should pass to him. The house, the land, the money." She paused. "And that I should go along with the property." Samuel went very still. "He's been looking for you," he said, not a question. "His name is Gerald Voss," Eleanor said. "And yes, he's been looking for me since October." The fire was low in the other room. The snow was still falling outside. And Samuel Carter stood in his dark kitchen and felt something come into focus, something clear, and decided the kind of feeling that shows up already made, rather than arriving as a thought. "You're safe here," he said. "You don't know what he's capable of." "You're still safe here." She looked at him. In the low light, her face was careful, measuring, searching for the catch, the angle, the price. "Why?" she asked. "Because you're a person," he said. "That should be reason enough." She looked away, and Samuel noticed that her hands, which had been clenched at her sides, slowly opened. When the roads cleared, Eleanor didn't leave. She didn't say she was staying. She didn't announce any change of plans. She simply continued doing what she had been doing, the cooking, the mending, the small repairs, the steady, useful presence of someone who believed their worth was measured in what they could contribute. Samuel let her stay without making it official. Making it official seemed like it would make her feel trapped. And the last thing Eleanor Hayes needed was to feel trapped. He started noticing things he had stopped noticing when the house was empty. He noticed the sound of another person moving through the house in the morning. The particular quiet of a house that has someone in it, which is entirely different from the quiet of a house that doesn't. He noticed how his dog Buck, an old red cattle dog, who had not shown enthusiasm for anything in 2 years, started following Eleanor around the yard, He noticed that meals had flavor now. Real flavor. Not because he couldn't cook, but because he had stopped cooking, as if it mattered. He noticed that he didn't fall asleep thinking about the long list of things that needed to be done tomorrow. He fell asleep thinking about the conversation over dinner. When had that changed? He couldn't pinpoint it. It had happened slowly, the way most important things happened, without announcement, without drama. Just one ordinary day rolling into the next. Until one morning you looked up and realized the whole landscape had shifted. 3 weeks after she arrived, a rider came to the ranch. Samuel was mending wire along the east fence when he saw the horse coming up the main road. He straightened and watched. The rider was not from Silver Creek Valley. He had the look of a man from somewhere with more money and more polished good coat. Well-kept horse, the posture of someone who was accustomed to being received. He stopped at the yard gate. "I'm looking for a woman," he said. "Name of Eleanor Voss. She would have come through here in November." Samuel kept his expression neutral. "Lots of people come through in November. This one would have been traveling alone. Wagon, dark hair, slight. Can't say I recall anyone by that name." The man's eyes moved slowly across the yard. The house. The barn. The wash line where Eleanor's blue dress was hanging to dry in the winter sun. Samuel's jaw tightened. "I'm representing her family," the man said. "They're concerned about her welfare." "That's kind of them," Samuel said. "If you do happen to come across her," the man said, pulling out a folded paper and holding it toward Samuel, "there's a reward for information." Samuel did not reach for the paper. "I'll keep that in mind," he said. The man held the paper a moment longer, then tucked it back into his coat. His eyes went one more time to the wash line. "Good day," he said, and turned his horse. Samuel watched him until he was out of sight. Then he walked back to the house fast and found Eleanor in the kitchen. She read his face before he said a word. She went white. "Someone was here," she said. "A rider, asking for Eleanor Voss." She gripped the counter. "Did he see?" He saw the wash line. "The blue dress." "Yes." She pressed her eyes shut for just a moment. When she opened them, there was something in her face that Samuel recognized, not fear exactly, but the particular expression of a person who has been a step ahead of disaster for so long that they've stopped being surprised when disaster closes the gap. "I need to leave," she said. "No," Samuel said. She looked at him. "Samuel, that's exactly what they want you to do. Run again, alone, in the middle of winter. I can't bring this to your door." "It's already at my door," he said. "Eleanor, look at me." She looked at him. "I'm not asking you to stay out of obligation," he said. "I'm telling you that running is what puts you in danger. If you leave now, you'll be on the road alone before whoever that man reports to can be told you've been found. That's not safe. And staying here is—" "Staying here means you're not alone," Samuel said. "There's a difference." She stared at him. "Why?" she said. "Why does it matter to you?" He held her gaze. "Because it does." It wasn't the most eloquent answer. He knew that. But it was honest, and something about its plain honesty seemed to reach her in a way a speech wouldn't have. She didn't agree to stay. She didn't say anything at all. But she didn't pick up her bag either. And that night at dinner, she passed him the bread without being asked, and he refilled her coffee without being asked. And outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and steady, and the house held the particular warmth of two people learning slowly, carefully, with all the caution of those who had been burned before, what it felt like not to be alone. That night, long after she had gone to her room, Samuel sat by the dying fire. He thought about the rider. He thought about Gerald Voss. He thought about a man who believed a woman could be property, could be tracked down and reclaimed like a lost horse. He thought about Eleanor's hands on the counter. He thought about the blue dress on the wash line. And he thought about something he had not let himself think about in 6 years. The future. What it might look like. What it might hold. He hadn't allowed himself to think about the future since Margaret died because the future without her had seemed like a room he had no reason to enter. He had been content, or had told himself he was content, to live in the present tense. Today's fences. Today's cattle. Today's dinner alone. But sitting there in the dim light with the snow falling and the house breathing around him, Samuel Carter found himself thinking about tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days arranged in a line behind those stretching forward into something he hadn't dared to name. He didn't say anything about it. Not yet. Some things needed time to become real. But he sat with it for a long while alone in the quiet house that wasn't quite as empty as it used to be, and he let himself feel it. Just that. He let himself feel it, and somewhere down the hall behind a door with a lock she had not used once, Eleanor Hayes lay awake and listened to the snow and wondered for the first time in a very long time whether the place she had stopped running might be the place she had been running toward all along. Neither of them slept much that night, but neither of them was alone in the dark either, and that was something neither of them had been able to say in a very long time. The writer came back 4 days later. Not the same man, a different one. Younger, harder, with the look of someone paid to find things rather than ask politely about them. He didn't stop at the gate this time. He rode straight into the yard like he owned it, and Samuel came out of the barn with a pitchfork in his hand before the man had fully dismounted. "This is private property," Samuel said. The man didn't look apologetic. "Gerald Voss sends his regards. He's been informed his sister-in-law may be in this area. He'd like her returned to the family." "Returned," Samuel said. Flat. "She's grieving. She's not thinking clearly. The family wants to make sure she's cared for." "She's not here," Samuel said. "Mr. Carter." The man smiled, but it didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "Mr. Voss is a patient man, but he does expect cooperation from the communities his business interests support. Silver Creek has a great deal to gain from his goodwill." Samuel looked at the man for a long, steady moment, the kind of moment that lets another person know exactly how little their words have landed. "Get off my property," Samuel said. The man held the smile 1 beat longer. Then he mounted and rode out without another word. Samuel stood in the yard until he was gone. Then he went inside, and Eleanor was standing at the kitchen table, and she had heard every word through the window. Her face was white. Not frightened white. Resigned white. The white of someone receiving news they already knew was coming. "He's going to keep sending people," she said. "Yes," Samuel said. "This won't stop." "No, it won't stop on its own." She pressed her palms flat on the table. "Samuel, I need you to understand something. Gerald Voss doesn't just want me back because of property or money or principle." She stopped, started again. "My husband owed him a debt, a large one. Gerald decided that I was the settlement." Samuel set the pitchfork against the wall. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "Tell me everything." She looked at him. "You don't want to know everything. I already have a man riding into my yard with threats dressed up as courtesy," he said. "I think I've already chosen which side of this I'm on. I'd just like to understand what I'm dealing with." She sat down slowly, and she told him. Her husband, Thomas Hayes, had borrowed money from Gerald Voss 3 years before his death. Not a small loan. A significant one secured against their property, their home, everything they'd built together. Thomas had believed he could repay it. He was wrong. By the time he died, the interest had grown the debt into something unpayable, and Gerald Voss had moved quickly legally and otherwise to collect everything the debt covered. The house went first, then the land, then the furnishings. Then Gerald had looked at Eleanor and decided she was an asset too. "He didn't say it like that," Eleanor said. "He said it like a kindness. He said he would take care of me. He said I was family." She shook her head. "He said Thomas would have wanted it. And you ran." "I had $40 a horse and a wagon that had already seen better days," she said. "I left at night. I've been moving since October." 2 months. Almost 3. Samuel was quiet for a moment. He was doing his own arithmetic. 3 months of moving alone in the cold on $40 with a man's hired men somewhere behind her. How did you survive? I worked where I could, cleaned, cooked, took in mending. She said it without self-pity, just facts. I'm not delicate, Samuel. I've never been delicate. I know that. She looked at him quickly, like she hadn't expected him to say that. I know that. He said again, quieter. I've watched you work for 3 weeks. Delicate is not the word. She looked down at her hands on the table. A long silence. What do I do? She asked, and she asked it the way a person asks when they genuinely don't know, not searching for reassurance, but actually asking. First, Samuel said, "We go see Tom Hadley." Who is Tom Hadley? The county sheriff. And a man who owes me a considerable favor from 1874. He stood up. If Gerald Voss wants to come into this county and make claims on a woman, he's going to have to do it in front of a man with a badge and the law behind him. Eleanor stared at him. You'd do that? I'm planning on doing that tomorrow morning. Samuel. She stood up too. If you get involved in this, he will come after you. Your land, your contracts. Whatever business you have in this territory, he will find a way to damage it. Let him try, Samuel said. That's not... You can't just... She stopped, took a breath. Why are you doing this? He looked at her across the table. Because someone should have done it sooner, he said. The answer sat between them. Eleanor's jaw worked slightly, the way it did when she was holding something back that wanted to come out. She didn't say thank you. He noticed that. She wasn't good at thank you. She was good at action, at work, at repayment. Gratitude expressed directly seemed to cost her something she couldn't afford. He understood that. He'd been the same way for years after Margaret died. Fine, she said at last. We go see the sheriff. He nodded. Get some sleep. We leave at first light. She turned toward the hallway, stopped, turned back. Samuel. Yeah. I don't know how to... She stopped again. The words seemed to be giving her trouble. I'm not used to people who don't want something in return. I know, he said. How do I know you're not one of them? He held her gaze. You don't, he said honestly. Not yet, but you will. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she went to her room, and Samuel stood in the kitchen for a while, thinking about what it meant that he'd just promised a woman he'd known for 3 weeks that he was worth trusting, and thinking about how badly he meant it to be true. They rode out at dawn. Eleanor sat straight in the saddle on the gray mare Samuel had lent her, her chin up, her expression set. She hadn't said much over breakfast. She'd made it biscuits again, coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and she'd eaten efficiently, and washed her dishes before he'd finished his, and she'd been waiting at the barn door when he came out. He had the thought watching her mount without assistance or comment that this was a woman who had learned to take up as little space as possible. Not because she was small in spirit, but because she had been taught steadily, deliberately over time, that taking up space cost her something. He wanted to say something about that. He didn't know how yet. The ride to town took 40 minutes. The road was frozen hard and clear, and the horses moved well. They didn't talk much. The silence between them had a different quality than it used to, less careful, more comfortable. The kind of silence that had already earned itself. Sheriff Tom Hadley was a thick-necked man in his 50s, with white at his temples, and the permanently tired eyes of someone who had spent 30 years watching people do foolish things to each other. He'd known Samuel since before either of them had gray in their hair. He received them in his office, poured coffee without asking, and listened without interrupting while Eleanor laid it out. She was precise. No drama, no tears, no appeal to sympathy. Just facts, dates, names, amounts. Samuel sat back and let her talk, and was struck again by how capable she was, how organized her thinking was, how clearly she could present her own case even while it was her own suffering she was describing. When she finished, Hadley leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Gerald Voss, he said. You know the name? Samuel asked. I know the name. He's got interests in 3 counties east of here. Not universally beloved. He looked at Eleanor. What you're describing him claiming you as debt settlement, that's not legal. Not in Montana territory, not anywhere. A man can't inherit a person. He has a lawyer, Eleanor said, and money to pay him. So do plenty of men in prison, Hadley said. He sat forward. Here's what I can do. I can make it official that you're a resident of this county with a documented statement of your situation on record. That makes any attempt to remove you forcibly or otherwise a legal matter I'm involved in. Voss's lawyers can argue all they want, but they'd be arguing against a county sheriff with documentation. Will that stop him? Eleanor asked. Hadley was honest. It'll slow him down. It'll make it expensive in public. A man like Voss prefers to operate where no one's watching. You put him in front of a judge and make it a matter of record, he loses some of his advantage. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Samuel watched her process it, the slight shift in her expression that meant she was weighing something. Do it, she said. Hadley got out the paperwork. Samuel sat back and drank his coffee and thought she's braver than she knows. Okay. They were almost back to the ranch when Eleanor said without preamble, "My husband hit me." Samuel's hands tightened on the reins. He didn't look at her. He understood instinctively that looking at her right now would be the wrong thing, that she was saying it forward into the distance ahead of them, and that turning it into a moment would make her stop. Not always, she said. Not at first, but by the end it was regular. She said the word carefully. I stayed because I thought I could fix it. Then I stayed because I thought I deserved it. Then I stayed because I didn't know where else to go. Samuel said nothing. He kept his eyes on the road. When he died, I thought I was free, she said. And then Gerald came, and I realized I had just moved from one cage to a different one. She paused. The second one had nicer curtains, something almost like a bitter laugh in her voice. Samuel let it land. I'm telling you this, Eleanor said, because you've been decent to me, and I want you to understand what decent looks like from where I'm standing. It's not normal to me, Samuel. A man who asks nothing. A man who doesn't keep score. A man who sits with the sheriff and makes sure my name is on a piece of paper. Her voice was even, but under it was something raw and barely contained. I don't know what to do with it. You don't have to do anything with it, Samuel said. It's just how a person should be treated. I know that, she said. I know it up here. She touched her temple briefly. But here, her hand moved to her sternum. Here, it still waits for the other shoe. Samuel looked at her then, just for a moment. Then I'll just have to make sure the other shoe doesn't drop, he said. She looked back at him. Her eyes were dry. She wasn't asking for pity, and she wasn't going to cry, and she wasn't going to collapse into gratitude. She was just looking at him the way a person looks at something they're deciding whether to trust. That's a large promise, she said. I don't make small ones, Samuel said. They rode the rest of the way in silence. But it was a different silence than before. Something had been put on the table between them, something real, something that couldn't be taken back. And neither of them was quite sure what to do with it yet. But neither of them wanted to put it away, either. Tummo. That evening something shifted in the house. Not dramatically, not in any way that could be pointed to and named, but it shifted. Eleanor had always been helpful, always been present, but there had been a layer of performance to it, the work of a woman proving she deserved her shelter. That evening, she set the table for dinner and then simply sat down while the stew was still cooking, something Samuel had never seen her do. She sat with her hands loose in her lap and her eyes on the fire, and she wasn't apologizing for the sitting, and she wasn't filling it with activity. She was just there. Samuel came in from checking the horses and saw her and felt something in his chest that he didn't have a word for. He put the kettle on and didn't say anything, and when the stew was ready, he served it, and they ate. And he told her about the time the east fence had come down in a spring flood, and he'd spent 3 days with the cattle ranging across 2 neighboring properties, and the trouble that caused. And she laughed. Actually laughed, sharp and surprised at the specific detail of the county assessor arriving at exactly the wrong moment. And it was the first time he had heard her laugh without holding something back. The sound of it did something to the room. "You have a good laugh," he said. She looked at him. "I haven't used it in a while." "I know." He paused. "You should use it more." She shook her head slightly, not dismissing the compliment, receiving it awkwardly the way she received all kindness, working out where to put it. "Tell me something about you," she said. "Something that isn't about the ranch or the winter or Gerald Voss." Samuel considered that. "Such as, what did you want to be?" she asked. "Before this, before you were a rancher in Montana." He raised an eyebrow. "Before I was a rancher in Montana, I was 22 years old, and I wanted to see the Pacific Ocean." "Did you ever—" "No." "Why not life?" he said simply. She nodded. She understood that answer completely. "What else?" "I wanted to read every book in every library I could find. I had a teacher in Ohio who believed reading was the one thing that couldn't be taken from you. I've been trying to prove her right ever since." "You have books," Eleanor said. She'd noticed the shelf in the main room. She hadn't mentioned it before. "A few," he said. "I haven't read in years," she said. "Thomas didn't—" She stopped. It wasn't encouraged. Samuel looked at her steadily. "You can read anything on that shelf." She glanced toward the main room. "Even the law books on the end. Especially those," he said, "given your current situation." She almost smiled. The edge of it. "Are you saying I should educate myself on property law?" "I'm saying knowledge is the one thing Gerald Voss can't take a document to and claim ownership of." She looked at him for a moment with something in her expression that took him a second to identify. It was respect, not gratitude, not warmth. Something sharper and more equal than either of those. Respect. He found unexpectedly that it mattered more to him than almost anything else she could have shown him. 2 weeks after the visit to Hadley, a letter arrived at the ranch. It was addressed to Eleanor Hayes, written on expensive paper, with a lawyer's letterhead from Helena. She read it twice. Then she set it down on the table. "He's petitioning the court," she said. "Gerald. He's claiming I stole property from the estate when I left. He's filed documents with the territorial court saying he has a legal right to recover the items I took." "What items?" Samuel asked. "A locket, my mother's, and the $40. She looked up. "He's claiming $40 is a theft from his inheritance." Samuel stared at her. "A locket and $40. "He doesn't care about the money," Eleanor said. "He cares about getting a judge to issue something that brings a marshal to this door." Samuel's jaw tightened. He thought about that. A marshal had authority that a hired rider didn't. A legal document would change the nature of this entirely. When does he expect a response? 30 days. Then we have 30 days. Samuel picked up the letter and read it himself. Legal language florid and precise, designed to look more powerful than it was. But underneath the language, the intent was plain. "Tom Hadley needs to see this," Samuel said. "Samuel." Eleanor put her hand on the table, not reaching for him, just placing it there near him. "I want you to hear me clearly. If this goes to a judge, if Gerald makes this a territorial matter, it stops being just my problem. It becomes yours. Officially. Your name will be in documents. Your ranch could be attached." "I know that." "You know that," she repeated. "Do you actually understand what that means for you?" He set the letter down and looked at her. "Eleanor, when I was 29 years old, my neighbor to the south, a man named Colton, had his wife taken by her family because they didn't approve of the marriage. They had legal standing money and a corrupt circuit judge. I watched him lose his wife, his will, and eventually his property, because no one stood up and said this is wrong out loud." He paused. "I told myself for years after that if I ever had the chance to be the person who stood up, I would." She was very still. "This is the chance," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "You're a complicated man, Samuel Carter," she said at last. "Not really," he said. "I just have a long memory." She picked up the letter, read it one more time, set it face down like she was done looking at it. "Then let's go see the sheriff," she said. And just like that, just with those 6 words, something changed again between them. Not the slow day-by-day change of the past weeks. This was sharper, deliberate. Eleanor had stopped saying "I" and started saying "let's." Samuel noticed. He didn't say anything about it, but he noticed. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about Gerald Voss and territorial courts and marshals and all the machinery of law that a man with money could point at a person like a weapon. He thought about the 30-day window and what needed to happen inside it. Then, because his mind would not stay organized, he thought about Eleanor. He thought about the way she'd said it wasn't encouraged when she meant her husband had forbidden her from reading. The practiced understatement of it. The reflex of a woman who had learned to shrink her language down to the smallest size that could still carry the meaning. He thought about the day he'd found her in the snow and she'd said, "Don't," before she said anything else. He thought about the laugh he'd heard tonight. He thought she came here frozen and afraid and ready to disappear, and something in the last few weeks has started to thaw her. Something slow and careful and not named yet. He knew what it was. He wasn't a fool. He'd known for a week or more, had felt it growing in the quiet of the house and the rhythm of shared meals, and the way her eyes sometimes found him across a room with something in them that she was not yet willing to say. He was 51 years old. He had loved one woman and buried her. He had told himself that was all he got, and he had believed it, and he had organized his life around that belief. The belief was having trouble holding. He pressed it back down. There was too much at stake right now, too much coming toward them from Gerald Voss's direction. He was not going to be the man who confused vulnerability for invitation, who leaned in when he should be building walls against what was coming. He would do what he had promised to do. He would stand between her and the machinery. Everything else could wait. He told himself that firmly, the way you tell yourself something you know is only halfway true, and eventually he slept. Down the hall, Eleanor lay awake much longer. She was reading one of his law books by the low light of a candle stub. She turned the pages slowly, carefully, noting things following the language to its conclusions. She was not. She told herself doing this because he had suggested it. She was doing it because knowledge was armor, and she had been unarmored for too long. She read until the candle burned too low to see by. Then she lay in the dark with the book on her chest and listened to the sound of the house. The particular sound of a house that had someone else breathing in it, and she thought about the word "let's." How long had it been since she had used that word? How long since anything in her life had been "we" instead of "I"? She didn't let herself follow the thought too far. She had learned the hard way what happened when she let herself hope too quickly, trust too easily, believe before she had enough evidence. But the word had come out of her without planning, and she had meant it. And in the cold Montana dark, that small, ordinary, enormous word sat between her sternum and the law book on her chest, and kept her company through the rest of the long night. The 30 days did not pass quietly. Gerald Voss was not a man who waited for legal processes to run their course when he had other tools available. Samuel learned this on the 8th day when he rode into Silver Creek to pick up supplies and found that his credit at Harlan's General Store had been quietly, without explanation, suspended. Harlan himself wouldn't meet Samuel's eyes when he said it. "I'm sorry, Samuel. I got a letter from a business concern in Helena. They hold the note on my expansion loan, and they've asked me to—" He stopped, started again. "I can't extend you credit right now." Samuel looked at the man he had known for 15 years, at the way Harlan's hands moved nervously across the counter, at the letter visible under the counter's edge, official and heavy with someone else's authority. "Who sent the letter?" Samuel asked. "A firm called Voss and Associates." Samuel paid for what he needed in cash. He rode home. He told Eleanor. She went pale. Then she went still. In that particular way, she had not frozen, not shut down, but processing fast and deep beneath a surface that showed nothing. "He's going after your business relationships," she said. "Yes." "Who else?" "I don't know yet." She stood up, walked to the window, stood with her back to him for a moment. When she turned around, her voice was level and her eyes were clear, and what was in them was not fear. It was something colder and more purposeful. "Tell me every business relationship you have in this county," she said. "Every man who owes you, every man you owe, every contract, every handshake agreement. Tell me all of it." "Eleanor." "I've been reading the law books," she said. "2 weeks of them. Tell me." He told her. She listened without writing anything down, which told him she was holding it in her head and sorting it as he spoke. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He can pressure Harlan because Harlan has debt he holds," she said. "What about the Brennan brothers, the ones who buy your cattle each spring? They're independent, no outside loans. Then he can't touch them." She looked at him. "Robert's at the feed mill. I own that relationship free and clear. We've done business for 12 years. He'll try to manufacture something," she said. "A rumor, a story about your character, something to make men nervous about associating with you." She paused. "That's what he did to us, to Thomas and me. When Thomas first started having trouble paying, Gerald didn't go to court first. He went to Thomas's friends, his business partners. He spread a version of events that made Thomas look like a liar and a cheat. By the time anyone might have helped us, they'd already been told not to." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "He's patient," Samuel said. "He's methodical," Eleanor said. "There's a difference. Patient men wait for the right moment. Gerald creates the moment." Samuel looked at her. "You've thought about this man for a long time." "I had 3 months on the road with nothing to do but think," she said. "I know how he works. I know what he does next." "Tell me." She sat back down. "After he cuts your business connections or tries to, he goes to your social ones. He will say something to your neighbors, to the people in town who respect you. He'll introduce a question about your character. Not an accusation. Gerald never makes direct accusations because those can be defended against. He makes people wonder. He makes them uncertain. And once a man's neighbors are uncertain about him, he's alone. And then he makes you an offer," she said. "He'll come, not personally. He never comes personally at this stage. He'll send a lawyer, a reasonable-sounding man with a reasonable-sounding solution. You give him what he wants, meaning me, and everything goes back to normal. Your credit restored, your reputation intact, no harm done." She said it like she was describing weather, like she was something to be handed over, weighed against the cost of inconvenience. Samuel looked at her across the table. "That's not going to happen," he said. "I know you believe that now." "Eleanor." His voice was quiet and absolute. "That is not going to happen." She looked at him. Something moved across her face. Something she pressed down quickly before it could become visible. She pressed it down because she had learned not to let herself believe things too fully until they had actually proven true. "Then we need Tom Hadley to move faster," she said. "I'm going to see him this afternoon." She nodded. "I'm coming." He didn't argue. Hadley had already heard about the letter to Harlan. "Word gets around," he said. He had the Voss letter, the one about the court petition, spread on his desk alongside 2 other documents. "I've been making inquiries. Gerald Voss has tried this approach before in Madison County. A widow named Pearson. He used the same method, buried her in legal paper, dried up her support system, then sent a lawyer with an offer she felt she couldn't refuse." "What happened to her?" Eleanor asked. Hadley was quiet for a beat too long. "She signed what he wanted her to sign," he said. "She lives in a house his family controls now, still does as far as I know." The room was very still. "That's not going to be Eleanor," Samuel said. "No," Hadley said. "It's not, because I've already sent a letter to the territorial judge in Helena, Judge Alderman. He and I served together a long time ago. I've explained the situation, the timeline, and the pattern of behavior." He tapped the documents on his desk. "What Voss is doing has a name. It's called constructive coercion. It's not easy to prove, but it's not impossible either. If Alderman is willing to take an interest, Voss's lawyers lose their home field advantage." "How long?" Samuel asked. For an answer from Alderman 2 weeks, maybe 3? Voss moves faster than that, Eleanor said. I know. Hadley looked at her directly. That's why the second thing I did was file a formal notice of your residency and your protected status as a citizen of this county with every relevant court in the territory. It's not airtight. But it means any marshal who comes to this county looking to act on Voss's petition has to come through my office first, and I can delay that. Delay it how long? Eleanor asked. Long enough if Alderman responds favorably. He paused. And if you and Samuel are willing to make this fully public. Samuel frowned. What do you mean? I mean there's something Voss hasn't counted on, Hadley said. He's used to operating in counties where he has financial leverage over most of the significant men. He doesn't have that here. Not yet. But if this stays quiet, he has time to build it. He looked between them. If it becomes a public matter, if the people of Silver Creek Valley know what's happening and why he loses the ability to work in shadow, men like Voss hate light. Eleanor sat very still. You're saying we should tell people, she said. I'm saying the truth is your best weapon right now, Hadley said. A woman who ran from a man who tried to claim her as debt payment and who is now trying to ruin a respected rancher to get her back, that's a story people will care about. These are people who built lives out here by refusing to be owned by anyone. Eleanor looked down at her hands. It means people will know, she said quietly. Everything. About Thomas. About what the marriage was. The room held that weight for a moment. Yes, Hadley said gently. It means that. Samuel said nothing. He waited. This was Eleanor's decision. He understood that completely the question of how much of herself she made public was not his to answer. She looked up. Then people will know, she said. Her voice didn't waver. Samuel felt something move through him that was so close to pride, it was nearly indistinguishable. The story spread through Silver Creek Valley, the way fire spreads through dry grass fast in all directions, unstoppable once it caught. Hadley told it to 3 men he trusted at the saloon that night. By morning, it had reached the church, the feed mill, and the homes of at least a dozen ranching families within 20 miles. By the end of the second day, a woman named May Brennan, wife of the elder Brennan brother, a solid woman with a voice that carried, came to Samuel's door with a pot of stew and an expression of fierce, quiet outrage. I heard what this Voss man is doing, she said, handing Samuel the pot. My husband says tell you the spring cattle contract stands no matter what, and the Reynolds family says the same. Nobody out here takes kindly to a man from Helena trying to run a woman like she's property. Eleanor came to the door behind Samuel. May Brennan looked at her for a moment. Then she reached out and gripped Eleanor's hand with both of hers. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She just held it firmly briefly and then let go. Eleanor stared at the empty doorway after May left. People who don't know me, she said, half to herself. They know enough, Samuel said. She turned. Her eyes were bright in a way that wasn't sadness and wasn't quite joy, something between the two, something cracking open. This isn't what I expected, she said. What did you expect? I expected them to side with money, she said. That's always what happens. Money wins. Not always, Samuel said. Not out here. She looked at him. You really believe that? I've lived here my whole adult life, he said. I've seen what people do when they're not afraid. When someone stands up first and makes it safe to stand up, they follow. He paused. Tom Hadley stood up. May Brennan followed. More will come. And if they don't, then we deal with what we've got, he said simply. She shook her head slowly. You're the most stubborn man I've ever met. Thank you, he said. She looked startled for half a second. Then something in her face broke open. Not sadness, not relief, but something bright and unguarded and completely real. And she laughed. The same laugh he'd heard once before. Sharp and surprised, and entirely herself. He smiled. Eat something, he said. May Brennan's stew doesn't deserve to get cold. On the 16th day, Gerald Voss arrived in Silver Creek himself. Samuel found out from the livery boy who came running to the ranch out of breath with the news that a man had checked into the Silver Creek Hotel, traveling with 2 other men and a lawyer, and had been asking questions about Samuel Carter since the moment he got off the stage. Samuel received this news with the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting for the thing he knew was coming. "He's here," he told Eleanor. She didn't ask who. She just set down the pot she was holding and stood very straight. "How long have we got?" she asked. "Before he does something I don't know. Before he sends the lawyer to make the offer Hadley predicted, probably tomorrow." She nodded. Her eyes were calculating. "Then we do something tonight." "What?" "We go to town," she said. "We don't hide. We walk in where people can see us, and he can't pretend this is quiet family business." She met his eyes. "If he wants to do this in the dark, we take away the dark." Samuel looked at her. This was not the woman who had sat in the snow and said don't. This was not the woman who had apologized for accepting kindness or asked, "What's the price of this meal?" This was someone else, someone who had always been there underneath the damage waiting for enough solid ground to stand on. "All right," he said. "We go to town." They rode in just before supper. The hotel sat at the center of town, well lit, visible from half the street. Samuel tied the horses at the rail in front of the general store directly opposite, and they went inside and bought nothing in particular and came back out and stood in the full light of the evening. Gerald Voss stepped out of the hotel 8 minutes later. Samuel had expected someone larger, more physically imposing. But Gerald Voss was a medium man in an expensive coat somewhere in his 50s with pale eyes and the kind of face that gave nothing away. He saw them across the street, and there was one beat, just one, where something moved behind those pale eyes. Then his face composed itself into something that looked almost like warmth. He started across the street. Samuel stepped forward slightly, just slightly, enough to be between Voss and Eleanor without making it theatrical. "Mr. Carter," Voss said, stopping a few feet away. "I've been hoping to speak with you." "Here I am," Samuel said. Voss's eyes moved past him to Eleanor. Whatever he expected her expression to be, it wasn't what it was. She was looking at him the way she'd looked at the Hadley documents clearly without fear analyzing. "Eleanor," Voss said. He made her name sound like a gentle reproach. "Gerald," she said. Equal and flat. His expression shifted slightly. "Not much." Just the small recalibration of a man who had expected a different version of this scene. "I think we've all allowed this to become more complicated than it needs to be," he said. He was speaking to Samuel now, man to man, voice pitched to be reasonable. "My sister-in-law has been through considerable grief. She made some impulsive decisions out of distress. The family simply wants her home, where she can be cared for properly." "The family," Eleanor said. "You mean you." "Eleanor, Thomas had no other family," she said. "His parents died in '68. He had no siblings. You are not family. You were his business creditor." Something flickered behind Voss's pale eyes. The relationship was more than financial. "The relationship was exactly financial," Eleanor said. "You loaned Thomas money at an interest rate designed to ensure he could never fully repay it. When he died, you moved to collect every asset the debt covered, and when that wasn't enough, you decided I was an asset too." Several people on the street had slowed, were listening, not pretending not to. Voss's voice dropped slightly. "This is not the place. I think it's exactly the place," Eleanor said. "I think a public street in a town full of people who built their own lives is exactly the right place to have this conversation." Voss looked at Samuel. Man to man again. The appeal to reason, to male solidarity, to the idea that the woman between them was an inconvenience they both shared. "Mr. Carter," he said. "You're an intelligent man. You understand the law. You understand that I have legitimate legal claims filed with the territorial court. I understand that you filed documents claiming a woman stole a locket and $40 from your estate," Samuel said. "I also understand that the territorial judge reviewing those documents received a letter last week from Sheriff Tom Hadley, describing a pattern of behavior that looks considerably less legitimate than your lawyers made it appear. The composure didn't crack, but it shifted, a barely perceptible tightening. The law has a way of finding its level, Voss said. It does, Samuel agreed. I'm counting on that. A beat passed. Consider the cost of this, Mr. Carter, Voss said quietly. Your business relationships, your standing in this community. None of these things are permanent. A man's reputation is a fragile thing. So is a man's freedom, Eleanor said, when people start asking questions about how he does business. Voss looked at her for a moment. And in that moment, something very close to the surface showed itself. Not anger, not bluster, but something cold and flat and patient. He was recalculating. He was not finished. He was not frightened, but he was recalculating. Good evening, he said, and turned and walked back across the street. The people watching on the sidewalks went back to their business slowly in the way people do when they've seen something they want to keep thinking about. Eleanor let out a long, slow breath. He's not done, she said. No, Samuel said. He's going to hit harder now. Yes. She turned to look at him. And you're still here. I'm still here, he said. She looked at him for a moment, a long searching look, the kind that was taking stock of something measuring it. Then she said quietly, Why do you keep doing this honestly? Not the good man answer, the real one. Samuel was quiet for a few seconds. Because the last 6 years I've been going through motions, he said. Work and sleep and work again. Not because I was content, because I'd stopped believing there was anything worth doing differently for. He paused. You came in from the snow and you said don't. And then you made breakfast and you laughed once with your whole self and I thought, there's a person worth standing next to. He paused again. That's the real answer. Eleanor was very still. That's not... She stopped. I know, he said. You didn't ask to be someone's reason. It's not that, she said. She looked away, looked back. Her voice when it came was unsteady in a way he hadn't heard before. I was going to say, that's not how anyone has ever spoken to me. They stood in the street in the cooling evening. Across the road, the hotel windows were lit. Somewhere inside them, Gerald Voss was talking to his lawyer. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Eleanor said very quietly, I don't know what to do with you, Samuel Carter. You don't have to do anything, he said. I'm not asking you for anything. She looked at him. I know, she said. That's the part I can't figure out. She turned and walked back toward the horses. He followed, and neither of them said anything else on the ride home. But the silence had changed again, the way it kept changing between them, each version of it containing more than the last. That night, Samuel found her at the front window again. The same place he'd found her 3 weeks ago, standing in the dark. But this time she wasn't holding herself. Her arms were at her sides. Her posture was different, less braced against something. Can't sleep? He asked. No, she said. But it's different tonight. Different how? She thought about it. Before, when I couldn't sleep, I was afraid of what was coming, she said. Tonight She paused. I don't know what tonight is. Samuel stood beside her and looked at the dark. When Margaret was dying, he said, she told me something I didn't understand until much later. She said, don't be a man who mistakes solitude for strength. She meant I had a habit of being alone and calling it self-sufficiency. Eleanor was listening. I've been very self-sufficient for 6 years, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know how to need people, she said. I had it trained out of me. I know, he said. I watched you try to pay for every kindness with labor for 2 weeks. She made a small sound that was something between embarrassment and recognition. Is it that obvious? A little. She turned her head and looked at him, and he looked back, and they were very close in the way that people standing in the dark at a window are close, and neither of them moved. Gerald is going to do something in the next few days, she said. "Something worse than the letter." "Probably," Samuel said. "Are you ready for it?" He looked at her. "Are you?" he asked. She thought about that. Really thought about it. He could see her doing it the same deep internal accounting she did before any important decision. "Yes," she said at last. "For the first time in a very long time, yes." He nodded. They stood at the window together for a while longer, watching nothing in particular, until the cold from the glass finally drove them back to their separate rooms. But Eleanor left her door slightly open that night. Not for any reason she could have explained. Just open. And Samuel, passing in the hall, noticed. And said nothing. And went to his room. And lay awake thinking about a man who mistakes solitude for strength, and a woman who had everything trained out of her, and the specific, fragile, enormous thing that was growing in the space between two people who were very careful not to name it yet. Outside, the Montana night pressed cold and dark and wide against the house, and inside, for the first time in a very long time, neither of them was afraid of what tomorrow would bring. Gerald Voss's next move came on a Thursday. Not through a lawyer, not through a writer, not through a letter on official paper with a firm's letterhead. It came through the church. Reverend Alcott had served Silver Creek Valley for 11 years. He was a mild man with a mild voice and the particular moral flexibility of someone who had learned that the wealthiest members of his congregation required careful handling. Samuel had never liked him much, had respected the function without warming to the man. Thursday morning, Alcott came to the ranch. Samuel was in the yard when the Reverend's horse came up the road. He watched it come. He already knew from the set of the man's shoulders and the way he wasn't quite meeting Samuel's eyes at 40 yards distance that this was not a social call. "Samuel." Alcott dismounted. "I wonder if we might speak privately." "Eleanor is in the house," Samuel said. "Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of her." Alcott hesitated. "It's a delicate matter." "Then say it carefully." Another hesitation. Then Alcott squared himself up in the way of a man delivering a message he didn't write. "There are concerns being raised. In the congregation. About the nature of your arrangement here. A woman living in your home unmarried. People are beginning to talk." Samuel looked at him for a long moment. "What people?" "Several families." "Which ones?" Alcott didn't answer that directly. "The concern is sincere, Samuel. This community holds itself to certain standards." "Who spoke to you?" Samuel said. His voice was still even. "Before you answer that, I want you to think carefully about what you're doing here and who sent you to do it." The Reverend's face shifted. Just slightly. The particular expression of a man who had told himself he was doing the right thing but is encountering the specific discomfort of having that belief questioned. "A Mr. Voss," Alcott said, quieter now. He expressed concern for the community's moral. "Gerald Voss," Samuel said, "is not a member of this community. He rode in 4 days ago from Helena for the purpose of taking a woman who ran from him and dragging her back." He kept his voice measured. "He's using you because he can't use the law fast enough. And you came here because he said something about donations to the building fund or words to that effect." Alcott's face went red. "That is not—" "Reverend." Samuel's voice dropped to something quieter and considerably more final. "Get back on your horse. Go back to town. And when Gerald Voss speaks to you again about Eleanor Hayes, you tell him you delivered his message and it didn't take." Alcott stood very still for a moment. Then he got back on his horse. Samuel watched him go. Then he turned, and Eleanor was standing in the doorway, and she had heard every word through the open window, and her face was the particular expression of someone who had hoped not to be surprised by something and been surprised anyway. "He went to the church," she said. "Yes." "He's trying to make this about my reputation." "Yes." She pressed her mouth tight. "If the congregation turns against you—" "The congregation is not going to turn against me," Samuel said. He believed it. He was not certain of it, but he believed it, and sometimes that was what the moment required. "May Brennan alone is worth 6 Alcotts, and she's not alone." Eleanor shook her head slowly. He is so much better at this than I thought he'd be. He's had practice, Samuel said. The widow Pearson. Oh, she nodded. She remembered. He wore her down, she said. He took things away one by one until there was nothing left, and signing felt like the only way to stop the bleeding. He's not going to do that here, Samuel said. Samuel! Her voice was direct and serious. I need you to hear me. I've been watching him work for 4 days, and I know what comes next. After the social pressure, after the reputation, he goes for the land. He will find something. A contested boundary line, an old debt, a procedural error in a deed, something. And he will use it to put your property in legal jeopardy. She paused. He doesn't need to win in court. He just needs to create enough uncertainty that you start to feel it's not worth fighting. Samuel was quiet. I know, he said. Do you have all your deeds? Your original land grants? In the strong box in the study. I need to look at them. He looked at her. I've been reading the law books for 3 weeks, she said. Let me do something useful with that. He brought her the strong box. She spent 4 hours at the kitchen table with the deeds, the survey documents, the original land grant certificates, and 2 of his law books open beside her. She read with her whole body leaning in, running her finger along lines, occasionally going back to the books, and then back to the documents, with the focused tunneling attention of someone who had found a task equal to their ability. Samuel worked through the house, staying close but not hovering. He checked in once. She waved him off without looking up. He made coffee, left a cup beside her. She drank it without acknowledging it. 2 hours later, she straightened. There's a gap, she said. He came to the table. Your northeast boundary. The original survey in 1869 places the line at the creek bed, but the 1874 resurvey, this document here, describes it as 40 yards east of the creek bed. She put her finger on the line. If someone argues that the 1874 description supersedes the 1869, one they could claim, your northeast quarter section is built on a disputed boundary. Samuel looked at the documents. I've never had a boundary dispute. You've never had someone looking for one, Eleanor said. She leaned back. He'll find this. He has lawyers who look for exactly this. And he'll file an injunction against the property while it's under dispute, which means you can't sell, can't borrow against it, can't use it as collateral for anything. Can he actually win the boundary dispute? Probably not, she said, but that's not the point. The injunction takes weeks to challenge, weeks during which your operation is hamstrung. She paused. He's not trying to take your land. He's trying to make your land a problem you have to solve instead of a war you can fight. Samuel sat down. He thought about it. Tom Hadley can't help with a civil land dispute, he said. No, Eleanor said. For that you need a lawyer. A real one, not the county kind. She looked at him. There is a woman in Helena, Agnes Whitmore. She was the first woman to pass the territorial bar. She's made a career of beating exactly this kind of maneuvering in court because she understands it better than the men who invented it. She paused. Hadley mentioned her name to me last week. I've been thinking about her since. A woman lawyer in Helena, Samuel said. Yes, he didn't hesitate. Write her a letter. Today. Something moved across Eleanor's face. Not quite surprise. Something quieter. Like a recalibration. A small adjustment to an expectation she hadn't even known she'd been carrying. You didn't even question it, she said. Why would I? Most men would have. She stopped. Never mind. Most men would have doubted her on the basis of being a woman, Samuel said. I'm interested in whether she can do the job. Eleanor looked at him. Yes, she said. She can do the job. Then write the letter. She wrote it that afternoon. 3 pages, precise and organized, laying out the timeline, the documents, the pattern of behavior, what she believed Voss's next legal move would be, and what she needed Agnes Whitmore to be ready to counter. Samuel read it over her shoulder when she finished. This is better than what Voss's own lawyers will file, he said. It should be, Eleanor said. I know his methods better than they do. She folded the letter. "I've been on the receiving end." She looked at what she'd written for a moment. Then she looked up at Samuel. "This is the first time in 8 years I've done something where I felt like my mind was mine," she said. "Not performing, just reporting." He didn't say anything. He put his hand briefly on her shoulder just for a moment, just that much, and then stepped back. She sealed the letter. The letter to Agnes Whitmore went out on Friday. Voss's lawyer came to the ranch on Saturday morning. His name was Crane. He was a thin man with a gray suit and the professional pleasantness of someone paid to make terrible things sound reasonable. He asked to speak with Samuel alone. Samuel brought him to the kitchen table and left the door to the hall open. Eleanor stood just out of sight and listened. "Mr. Carter," Crane began, "my client is a reasonable man. He's prepared to resolve this entire matter simply and without further unpleasantness." "Go on," Samuel said. "Mrs. Voss, Mrs. Hayes has been through a difficult time. My client acknowledges that. He holds no ill will. He simply wants to ensure she's properly provided for within the family structure." "She has a family structure," Samuel said. "It's here." A brief pause. "You've known this woman for less than 2 months. "That's correct." "And you're willing to risk your property, your business relationships, and your standing in this community for someone you've known less than 2 months?" "Yes," Samuel said. Another pause, longer this time. "My client is prepared to be generous," Crane said. "If you will encourage Mrs. Hayes to return with us voluntarily, he will withdraw the court petition, restore your credit with the businesses he has contacted, and provide a written assurance that he has no further interest in any matters relating to Silver Creek." "And Eleanor," Samuel said. "She would be returned to the family." "What happens to Eleanor?" Samuel said. Slower, clearer. Crane adjusted in his seat. "She would be provided for, comfortably. My client's home is— Does she have freedom of movement? She would be. Does she have her own money? Financial arrangements would be. Can she leave if she wants to?" Crane stopped. The silence was its own answer. "Get out of my house," Samuel said. Crane stood. He gathered his papers with the deliberate care of a man who wanted to appear unruffled. "Mr. Carter, I want to be very clear about what refusal means. My client will proceed on every legal front available to him. The boundary dispute filing will be submitted to the territorial court Monday morning. That injunction will tie your property in legal limbo for no fewer than 6 months. Additionally—" "I heard you," Samuel said. "I said get out of my house." Crane left. Eleanor came out from the hallway. She stood in the kitchen and looked at Samuel, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. "He's filing Monday," she said. "Yes. That's 2 days. I know." She pressed both hands to the table. Her jaw was tight. "We needed more time for Agnes Whitmore to respond." "We don't have more time," Samuel said. "So we use what we have." "What do we have?" "Hadley, the Brennans, May, the letter already in transit." He looked at her. "And you?" She looked at him. "You said you know his methods better than anyone," Samuel said. "So tell me, if he files Monday and we can't stop the filing itself, what's the one thing that disrupts his strategy?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She was thinking hard, he could see it. "Evidence," she said at last. "If we can show a judge that the boundary dispute is manufactured, that the same tactic was used against the widow Pearson, and possibly others, it changes the filing from a legitimate legal dispute into a pattern of predatory behavior." She paused. A judge who sees a pattern doesn't just rule on the one case. He looks at the man behind it. "Can we document Pearson?" "If she'll speak," Eleanor said. "If she's willing. Hadley might know how to reach her." "She's in Helena now," Eleanor said. "Inside whatever arrangement Voss forced her into." She was quiet for a moment. "She might not be willing. She might be afraid. She might also be waiting," Samuel said, "for someone to give her a reason not to be." Eleanor looked at him. "You think a woman in her situation would risk testifying against him?" she said. "I think—" Samuel said carefully, that you ran from him in October with $40 and a failing wagon, because at some point something told you it was better to risk everything than stay one more day. He met her eyes. She might be the same. Eleanor was very still. Then she nodded. Once. Hadley. Tonight. They rode to Hadley's home. Rather than the office, it was Saturday evening, and the situation felt too urgent for the distance of official channels. Hadley answered the door in his shirt sleeves with a coffee cup in his hand, and took one look at their faces and stood back to let them in. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When they finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I know someone in Helena who knows Mrs. Pearson's situation," he said. "I can send a telegram tonight, but Eleanor—" He looked at her directly. "If she agrees to give a statement, it has to be her decision. Freely made." "I know that," Eleanor said. "I would never—" She stopped. "I know what it costs a woman to speak against a man who has legal power over her. I know exactly what it costs." Hadley nodded. "I'll send the telegram." He sent it that night. They rode home in the dark. The cold was sharp and clean. Their horses moved steadily, and neither of them hurried. "What if she doesn't respond?" Eleanor said. "Then we fight without that peace," Samuel said. "And if the injunction locks your property, then we fight through the injunction." She looked at him sideways. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple," he said, "but it's clear. There's a difference." She was quiet for a while. The horses breathed white into the cold air. "Samuel," she said. "Yeah. I want to tell you something." He waited. "When I was married to Thomas—" She stopped. Reorganized. "There were good days at the beginning, before the drinking got bad and the debt got worse, and even on those days I never felt—" She paused again, looking for the right word. He could feel her looking for it. "I never felt like my presence made a difference, like the house was different because I was in it." He listened. "Your house is different," she said. "I can feel it, the way a room holds differently when you walk into it, the way Buck follows me, the way you—" She stopped. "I feel like I make a difference here. I haven't felt that since I was a girl." "You do," Samuel said. His voice was low and even and completely certain. "You make a considerable difference." She nodded once, looked at the road ahead. "I don't know what to do with that yet," she said. "You don't have to do anything with it," he said. "It's just true." They rode the rest of the way without talking. But when they reached the yard and dismounted and she handed him her horse's reins to take to the barn, their hands were close in the exchange, and she didn't move hers away immediately. A second, maybe two. Then she went inside. Samuel stood in the dark yard holding both sets of reins and felt something enormous and quiet sitting in his chest, and he let himself feel it without naming it and without pushing it away. Net. The telegram response came Sunday evening. Hadley rode out to the ranch himself to deliver it. He had the paper in his hand, and his expression was the kind that carried both weight and light at the same time. "Mrs. Pearson will give a statement," he said. Eleanor's hand went to her mouth. "She's been waiting," Hadley said. "She told my contact she's been waiting for someone to make it possible." He looked at Eleanor. "She said if there's another woman willing to stand up, she won't let her stand alone." Eleanor stood very still. Samuel watched her. Watched the thing that moved through her face, a complex, layered thing, not simple at all, not just relief or gratitude. It was something like the feeling of a window opening in a room that has been closed too long. She absorbed it slowly, all of it, the fact that she wasn't the only one, that another woman had been carrying the same weight, that two of them together changed the shape of what was possible. "She said that," Eleanor said quietly. "She said she won't let me stand alone." Those were her words, Hadley said. Eleanor looked at the telegram. She didn't take it from Hadley right away. She just looked at it. Then she reached out and took it, held it. "Two women," she said, more to herself than either of them. "Two women and a documented pattern," Hadley said. "That's a different case than one grieving widow being difficult about estate settlement." Eleanor looked up. Her eyes were bright and dry and certain. File everything Monday morning, she said. All of it. Whatever we have, we don't wait. Already planned, Hadley said. He rode back to town with the telegram and a list of documents Eleanor had sent him, and the look of a man who had spent 30 years in law enforcement waiting for a case that was actually worth the fight. After he was gone, the house was quiet. Samuel was at the table. Eleanor stood at the window, not the way she used to stand there braced and watchful, scanning for danger. She was standing loosely, looking at the dark yard with the telegram still in her hand. "You know what I keep thinking about?" she said. "What?" "October. The night I left." She turned slightly, not fully toward him, halfway between the window and the room. "I had $40 and a wagon that was already cracking on the left wheel. I left at 2 in the morning because I was afraid if I waited for daylight, I would talk myself out of it." She paused. "I had no plan. I had no idea where I was going beyond a way. I just knew if I stayed one more day I would disappear. Whatever was left of me that was still mine would be gone." Samuel said nothing. He let her talk. "I told myself all the way to Montana that I had made a mistake, that I was foolish, that no woman alone survived this kind of thing, that I should turn around and go back and find a way to live inside what Gerald had decided for me." She turned to face him fully. "Then the wheel broke and the storm came and you came out of the dark with a lantern and you said you weren't going to hurt me and I said don't, and you held up your hands." He remembered. He hadn't known until this moment that she remembered it that specifically. "You held up both hands," she said. "Like it was obvious. Like of course you would. Like that was just the natural response of a decent person." She shook her head slightly. "I had forgotten that was possible." "Eleanor," he said. "I'm not finished," she said. Not sharp, just clear. He waited. "I'm trying to tell you something and I need to get it out before I lose my nerve," she said. "I have been careful with you. I have been very careful because I have been wrong before, badly expensively wrong about whether a man was safe. And I made a decision when I ran from Gerald that I would never again trade my judgment for the feeling of not being alone." He was very still. "But I've been watching you for 2 months," she said. "I've watched you with the sheriff, and with the Brennans, and with Alcott, and with Crane, and with Voss himself standing on the street. I've watched you when you thought no one was watching. I've watched you with your dog and your horses, and the way you speak to the livery boy, like he's a man worth speaking to." She paused. "And I keep coming back to the same conclusion." "What conclusion?" he asked. His voice was quiet. "That you are exactly who you appear to be," she said. "And that is the most terrifying thing I have ever encountered in my life." He understood that completely. He understood it in his bones. "Why terrifying?" He asked anyway because he wanted to hear her say it. "Because if you're real," she said, "then I have to stop protecting myself from you. And I have spent 8 years learning to protect myself, and I am very good at it, and I don't know who I am without it." Samuel stood up slowly. He walked toward her and stopped at a respectful distance, not close enough to crowd close enough to be seen. "You don't have to stop protecting yourself," he said. "You just have to decide whether I'm someone you're protecting yourself from or someone you're protecting yourself with." She looked at him. The telegram was still in her hand. "With," she said. Barely above a whisper. He nodded. That was all. He nodded once slowly, like a man receiving something important and treating it with appropriate care. "With," he said back. They stood in the quiet kitchen with the fire low and the Montana dark pressing at the windows, and something settled between them that didn't need to be named yet. That was better for not being named yet. That was the particular thing that can only exist in the space just before two people acknowledge what they already know. Neither of them moved toward the other. Neither of them moved away. And outside somewhere in the direction of town, Gerald Voss was in a hotel room with his lawyer reviewing documents for a Monday morning filing that was about to meet a defense he had not predicted. And inside the ranch house, the woman he had spent months hunting had stopped running. Not because she was caught, because she had found something worth staying for. And the man beside her, who had spent 6 years believing his heart had already done everything it was going to do, stood in the warmth of his own kitchen and felt it prove him wrong. Neither of them slept well that night. But it was not the sleeplessness of fear. It was the sleeplessness of standing at the edge of something vast and new and real, and knowing that morning was going to ask them to step forward, and finding against all expectation that they were ready. Monday came the way hard days always come, ordinary on the outside, carrying everything on the inside. Samuel was up before dawn. Eleanor was already in the kitchen when he came downstairs. The coffee made the table set, her hands moving with the particular steadiness of someone who has decided not to be afraid today, and is holding that decision with both fists. She looked up when he came in. "Hadley is filing at 8, she said. "I know." "Voss's lawyer will be there too, Crane." "Probably." She set his coffee in front of him. She didn't sit down yet. She stood at the counter with her own cup and looked at the wall for a moment in a way that told him she was running through something in her head, checking it, testing it the way she did when she was preparing. "Are you afraid?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "Of Voss, no," she said. "Of the judge a little. Of what it means if we win." She stopped. He looked at her. "What does it mean if we win?" She turned and looked back at him. Her voice was even. "It means I stop being in crisis," she said. "It means I have to figure out what I am when I'm not running or fighting." She paused. "I haven't known that in a long time." Samuel wrapped his hands around his cup. "You're the woman who made me breakfast on the second morning," he said. "The woman who read law books for 3 weeks and wrote a letter better than any lawyer I've met. The woman who stood in the street and told Gerald Voss exactly what he was in front of everyone who needed to hear it." She was quiet. "That's who you are when you're not running," he said. "You've been showing me for 2 months." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat down. And they drank their coffee in the early dark, and the house held them, and neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. Some mornings presence is the whole conversation. They rode into Silver Creek at 7:30. The courthouse was a low building 2 blocks from the hotel where Voss was still staying. Hadley was already on the steps with a leather satchel under his arm and the look of a man ready for a long day. He nodded when he saw them coming. "Agnes Whitmore's response arrived this morning," he said before they'd fully dismounted. He was already pulling the paper out. "She can't be here in person today, but she's filed a formal motion through the territorial court to have Voss's boundary dispute claim reviewed as part of a pattern of conduct inquiry." She attached the Pearson documentation and 3 other cases. Eleanor stopped moving. "3 other cases," she said. "Mrs. Pearson wasn't the only one," Hadley said. "Whitmore found 2 more women in the last 4 years, different counties, same method." He looked at Eleanor. "You were right about the pattern. She found it in the records." Eleanor stood very still on the courthouse steps with the morning cold around her, and something passing through her expression that was too complicated to be named simply. It was the specific feeling of having been right about something you desperately wished you'd been wrong about. The grim, complicated knowledge that your suffering was not unique, that other women had stood where you were standing, that the machinery you'd been fighting was larger than you knew. "4 of us," she said. "That we know of," Hadley said quietly. She pressed her mouth tight, nodded once. "Then let's make sure there isn't a 5th." They went inside. The hearing was not what Samuel had expected. He had expected drama, a confrontation. Voss's lawyers objecting at volume Crane, drawing himself up and delivering speeches about property rights and estate law and the natural order of things. What he got instead was something colder and more procedural, and somehow more frightening, the quiet, efficient machinery of a man who had done this before, and knew exactly how each piece moved. Crane filed the boundary dispute injunction at precisely 8 o'clock. Efficient. Clean. The kind of filing that had been prepared long before Monday morning. Hadley filed the counter documentation 30 seconds later. The residency claim. The protected status. Whitmore's motion. The Pearson statement. The pattern of conduct inquiry. The clerk, A young man who looked like he hadn't anticipated his Monday being this interesting processed both stacks with the focused expression of someone trying very hard not to appear to be following the story. The judge assigned to review the preliminary filings was a man named Garrett. He was old enough to have gray eyebrows and young enough to have impatience for wasted time. He looked at both stacks for exactly 3 minutes before he looked up. "Mr. Crane," he said, "your client is filing a boundary dispute claim on a property in Silver Creek Valley from a hotel room in town. My client has legitimate interests in the territorial land survey records. Your client arrived in this county 5 days ago," Garrett said. "He has no property here, no business registered here, and no prior legal relationship with the owner of the property in question." He looked at the stack Hadley had provided. "He does, however, appear to have a prior relationship with Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, who resides on that property." He set down the papers. "Before I hear anything about boundary surveys, I want to understand why a man from Helena is filing a land claim against a Silver Creek rancher who happens to be sheltering the woman he's separately pursuing in court." Crane's mouth opened. "That's a coincidence you're going to have to explain clearly," Garrett said, "and I am not a patient man before noon." Crane explained. It took 12 minutes and was, Samuel had to admit professionally, done a careful, well-constructed story that used the word family 14 times and the word concern 8 times, and never once used the word control. Hadley responded in 6 minutes. He used documentation rather than storytelling, which turned out to be considerably more effective. Garrett listened to both, looked at the Whitmore filing, looked at the Pearson statement. Then he looked at Eleanor, who had sat through all of this with her hands flat on the table in front of her and her expression composed and attentive. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "do you wish to address the court?" "Yes," she said. She stood, and Eleanor Hayes, who had spent years learning to make herself small, stood in a Montana courtroom and told the truth in full. Not the careful version, not the abbreviated version designed to minimize discomfort. The whole truth. Thomas's debts. Gerald's maneuvering the night she left, the 3 months on the road, the $40, the locket, the riders. Voss had sent Alcott Crane's visit to the ranch, and every detail of the method she had documented in her reading and her thinking and her 3 weeks of law books. She spoke for 11 minutes. When she sat down, the room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when something real has just been said in them. Garrett looked at Crane. "Does your client wish to respond to the pattern of conduct inquiry filed by Ms. Whitmore's office?" Crane looked at his papers, then at Garrett. "We would request additional time to—" "I'm going to pause these proceedings," Garrett said, "and refer the boundary dispute filing to the same inquiry panel reviewing the pattern of conduct question. That panel will review all related filings simultaneously." He looked at Crane over his glasses. "Your client's boundary claim will not be heard in isolation. It will be heard in context." He closed the folder. "We're adjourned." Crane sat down. He had the expression of a man recalculating. Hadley leaned toward Samuel and Eleanor. "That's not a win," he said quietly. "But it's the right outcome for today. The inquiry panel moves slower than a single judge, but it's a lot harder to influence. And once Whitmore has all 4 cases in front of one panel—" He paused. "A pattern is a pattern. They can't ignore 4. Eleanor was looking at the door through which Crane had exited. "Voss will know by noon," she said. "Yes," Hadley said. "And he'll know the panel is the harder path." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "He might walk away," she said. It sounded like she was testing the idea, seeing if she believed it. "He might," Hadley said. "A public inquiry into his business methods. 4 women with statements, a territorial lawyer who's made a career out of this kind of case. That's expensive and loud, and exactly the opposite of how he prefers to operate." He paused. "Or he might double down." Eleanor looked at Samuel. "Which do you think?" she asked him. Samuel thought about the pale eyes on the street, the controlled composure. The man who had sent Alcott to the church rather than threatened them directly himself. "He'll calculate the cost," Samuel said. He's not emotional about this. It was always a transaction to him. If the transaction becomes too expensive, he'll close the account. And find someone else, Eleanor said. Eleanor, that's why the panel matters, Hadley said. Whitmore doesn't just want him to walk away from you. She wants him on record. She wants the pattern documented. She wants the next woman to have somewhere to point to. Eleanor absorbed this. Tell Whitmore thank you, she said. And tell her when the panel convenes I'll be there. I'll tell her, Hadley said. They were halfway home when Samuel heard the rider coming up fast behind them. He turned. A young man on a dark horse pushing hard, raising a hand when he saw them looking. They stopped. The rider pulled up. He was out of breath. He worked for the telegraph office. Samuel recognized him from the counter. Message came in 20 minutes ago, the boy said, holding out a folded paper. For Mrs. Hayes. The telegraph man said it looked important. Eleanor took it, opened it. She read it twice. Her face was very still. She handed it to Samuel without a word. It was from Crane. The message was brief and professional and contained exactly one sentence that mattered. My client has instructed me to withdraw all filings related to the estate of Thomas Hayes, and to cease all related inquiries in Silver Creek County, effective immediately. Gerald Voss had calculated the cost, and he had walked away. Samuel read it twice, looked at Eleanor. She was staring at the road ahead. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were bright. She was holding herself very carefully the way she did when something was moving through her that she wasn't ready to release in public. It's over, Samuel said. She nodded, once, didn't speak. The young rider touched his hat and turned his horse and cantered back toward town. The road was empty again. They sat on their horses in the middle of the road in the cold Montana morning, and the silence was enormous. Then Eleanor made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob, but was something raw and real that lived between the two, and she pressed her hand over her mouth and her shoulders shook once, just once. And then she pulled in a long breath through her nose and straightened. Sorry, she said. Don't, Samuel said. She looked at him. Her eyes were wet, and her chin was steady, and she was the most composed, undone person he had ever seen. It's over, she said, like she was learning the shape of the words. It's over, he said. She looked up at the sky, a long look like she was checking to make sure it was still there. What do I do now? She said. Not to Samuel specifically, just out loud. The question a person asks when the emergency that has structured their life for months suddenly stops. Whatever you want, Samuel said. She looked at him. Something in that phrase had caught on something in her, and she was sitting with it. Whatever I want, she repeated. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment. I want to go home, she said. He nodded. He turned his horse. She turned hers. They rode home together, and home was the ranch, and she had said it without thinking, and they both heard it, and neither of them mentioned it, and it was the most significant thing said between them all day. That evening was different from every other evening in the 2 months she had lived at the ranch. Not dramatically different, not marked by ceremony or declaration, but different in the way that things are different when a tension that has been present so long it became invisible is suddenly gone. Eleanor cooked. She cooked the way she cooked when she was happy, which Samuel had learned to distinguish from the way she cooked when she was proving something more relaxed, more generous with the spices, humming something under her breath that she stopped when she noticed him noticing. He set the table without being asked. He'd been doing it for a week and a half, and she'd never commented on the moment he'd started, and he'd never explained it. They ate. After dinner, he built the fire up and they sat near it, not at opposite ends of the room, not at a careful social distance, but near each other, the way people sit when nearness has stopped requiring justification. She had one of his books open, but she wasn't reading it. She was looking at the fire. Samuel, she said. Yeah. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask me anything. She turned her head to look at him. The night you found me in the snow, What would you have done if I hadn't taken your hand? He thought about it honestly. Stayed until you did, he said. Or until you told me to leave, and then probably stayed close enough to make sure you didn't freeze. She shook her head slowly. You didn't know me. No, he said. You didn't know if I was dangerous or unstable or... You were a woman in the snow in a blizzard, he said. Whatever else you were didn't matter as much as that. She looked at him with that particular look, the measuring look, the one that was checking whether what she was seeing was real. My father was like that, she said quietly. When I was small, he was the kind of man who just did what was right because it was right without making a production of it. She paused. He died when I was 12. After that, she stopped. I spent a long time trying to find that kind of person again. I found Thomas instead. I'm sorry, Samuel said. Don't be, she said, and then quieter. I found you instead, eventually. The fire moved between them. Samuel set down the cup he was holding. He turned toward her fully. Eleanor, he said. I know, she said. Before he could continue, I know what you're going to say. Do you? You're going to say something careful, she said. Something that leaves me room to say no. Something that makes sure I know I'm not obligated. She paused. You've been doing that for 2 months, leaving me room. Has it bothered you? No, she said. It's why I trust you. She looked at him directly. But I'm tired of waiting for one of us to stop being careful. He was very still. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I said home today, and I meant it. This is home. You. She stopped, steadied. You are the first person in my adult life who made me feel like myself. Not a wife, not a problem, not an obligation, not a charity case. Just myself. Her voice was steady, and her eyes were clear. I don't want to protect myself from that anymore. Samuel looked at her for a long moment. I told myself, he said slowly, after Margaret, that I had used up whatever it is a person has that lets them love someone, that I'd spent it all and the account was closed. He paused. You've been making a liar out of me since about the 3rd day. She almost smiled. Only the 3rd day. I was being conservative, he said. It was probably the 2nd. The almost smile became real. That full, unguarded laugh lived just behind it, and then came quick and bright and completely hers. He reached over and took her hand. Not a dramatic gesture. Just took her hand, the way you take something you've decided belongs there, and held it. And she looked down at their hands, and then up at him. And the laughter in her face had moved into something quieter and deeper and entirely serious. You don't have to choose me, she said, softly. Not the desperate whisper of a woman asking to be let go, a different version of the same words. A woman who was still underneath everything, not quite sure she was allowed to have this. Too late, he said. She looked at him. I already did, he said. And there it was, the thing they'd been circling for 2 months, said plainly in the firelight without drama or performance. Just true. She squeezed his hand. Once. Tight. Me too, she said, barely audible. I already did too. They sat like that for a long while, her hand in his, the fire between them, and the Montana dark outside, and the house breathing around them, warm and solid and real. Spring came to Silver Creek Valley the way spring always came, late and sudden and absolute, turning the frozen ground to mud, and then to green in the space of 2 weeks. Agnes Whitmore's panel convened in April. Eleanor traveled to Helena to give her testimony. She was gone 4 days. Samuel drove her to the stage himself, and she came back on a Thursday afternoon with the particular tiredness of someone who has done something costly and necessary and right. She told him about it over dinner. The panel had heard all 4 women. Mrs. Pearson had given her testimony first in a voice that shook and never stopped. The other 2 had been brief and precise and devastating. Eleanor had gone last, and she had been neither brief nor shaking. She had been thorough, organized, and specific in the way she had learned to be thorough and organized and specific, and the panel had listened without interrupting. Gerald Voss's lawyers had attempted 3 separate procedural objections. All 3 were denied. The panel's finding was not a criminal conviction. The law did not yet have language for everything Voss had done. But it was a documented official permanent record of predatory conduct. His ability to practice the specific legal maneuvers he had used in 4 counties was severely curtailed. 3 judges in the territory had been notified. Agnes Whitmore had already announced plans to pursue legislative remedy. "It's not enough," Eleanor said. "What happened to Mrs. Pearson, what happened to the other 2, it's not undone." "No," Samuel said. "But it's on record," she said. "He can't pretend it didn't happen. And the next woman—" She paused. "The next woman will have somewhere to point." Samuel nodded. "That matters." "It matters," she agreed. She looked at her plate, then looked up. "Whitmore wants me to write it down. The whole thing. How I documented the pattern, what I looked for in the law books, how I knew what he'd do next." She paused. "She thinks it could help other women in similar situations." Samuel looked at her. "Will you?" She thought about it. "Yes," she said. "I think I will." He smiled. She caught it. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "I just keep watching you figure out what you are when you're not running, and it keeps being more than you think." She shook her head, but she was smiling. The full smile now, the one that had been arriving more easily every week, the one that no longer surprised her when it showed up. On a Saturday in late May, May Brennan came to the ranch with her husband and 2 of her grown daughters, and there was a minister, not Alcott, who had quietly relocated to a different congregation, but a younger man from the next valley who had a direct handshake and no financial relationships with anyone in Helena. It was not a large ceremony. It was not meant to be. It was 11 people in the yard of a working ranch with a spring sky overhead and the cattle visible through the fence. And Buck the cattle dog sitting with great dignity near Eleanor's feet, because he had claimed her months ago and saw no reason to adjust this position for a formal occasion. The minister asked Samuel if he took Eleanor Hayes as his wife. He said yes with the uncomplicated certainty of a man who made up his mind a long time ago and hasn't reconsidered since. The minister asked Eleanor if she took Samuel Carter as her husband. She was quiet for just a moment. Not uncertain, not afraid, just taking it in. The full weight of it. The yard. The people. Samuel's face. "Yes," she said, clear and complete. May Brennan cried. She was unashamed about it and had brought an extra handkerchief in anticipation of herself. Samuel's neighbor, old Roberts from the feed mill, shook Samuel's hand afterward with both of his and didn't say anything at all, which was the highest compliment Roberts ever paid anyone. Eleanor stood in her own yard, their yard, and received the congratulations of people who had known her for less than 5 months and treated her like someone who had always been there, and something in her chest that had been clenched for 8 years opened slowly like a hand releasing something it had been holding too tight for too long. She found Samuel beside her at some point in the middle of it all. He didn't say anything. He put his hand at the small of her back just briefly, just to let her know he was there. She leaned into it slightly, and he felt it and stayed. That evening, their first evening, they sat on the porch as the sun went down over the valley. The long Montana light, doing what Montana light does in late May, which is to say, it lingered far past when it should, painting everything gold and stubborn and unhurried. Eleanor said, "Do you ever think about the Pacific Ocean?" He looked at her. "Sometimes." "We should go," she said. "Not now. Someday. When the fall cattle are sold and the winter arrangements are made." He looked at the valley, at the light. "You want to see the Pacific Ocean." "I want you to see it," she said. "You've been wanting to for 30 years. That seems like long enough to wait." He was quiet for a moment. "You know," he said, I spent 20 years believing my life was already mostly lived, that the best parts were behind me and the job now was just to finish the work and close things down properly. She looked at him. I was wrong, he said simply. She reached over and took his hand. He closed his around hers, without looking the way you do with something familiar, something that has found its place. I was going to disappear, she said. Not sadly, just clearly. I felt it happening. Every day a little more of me was going to be gone until there was nothing left that was mine. I know, he said. You stopped it, she said. Not by saving me. I want to be clear about that. I saved myself. I got in that wagon, I drove through the winter, I found the sheriff, I wrote the letter, I stood in the street. She paused. But you... I held up my hands, he said. You held up your hands, she said. In the dark. And it was enough. It was enough for me to take one step, and then another. He looked at her. You came the rest of the way yourself, he said. Yes, she said. I did. The light was almost gone now. The valley was purple and blue, and the first stars were showing above the eastern ridge. I'm not the woman who arrived here, Eleanor said. I won't ever be her again. I don't want to be. No, Samuel said. You're not. I'm something better, she said. Not with vanity. With the quiet earned certainty of someone who has done the reckoning and come out the other side. Yes, he said, you are. She looked at the sky. He looked at her, and Buck sighed enormously from his position at their feet, deeply satisfied with the settled state of things, and put his head down on his paws. Years later, the people of Silver Creek Valley would tell the story the way communities hold on to the stories that prove what they want to believe about themselves. That goodness is recognized, that courage is rewarded, that a person is not their worst chapter. They told it right. Samuel Carter had been a man who survived everything and felt almost nothing until a woman arrived in a storm and reminded him that survival without living was just a long, slow disappearance. Eleanor Hayes had been a woman who nearly vanished. Not in a snowstorm, but in the way that is slower and harder to see the daily erosion of a self that had no one to tell it mattered. They had been separately two people who had almost stopped. Together, they became proof of something that everyone over 50 years old already knows deep in the part of themselves they don't always say out loud, that it is never too late to be chosen. It is never too late to choose. And the love that arrives after loss, after damage, after the years when you had stopped looking, that love does not need to apologize for being late. It just needs to be true, and theirs was. Completely. Permanently. Without question. She had whispered, "You don't have to choose me," and he had answered too late. "I already did." And every day after that, they chose each other again. Not out of obligation, not out of need, but out of the clear-eyed, fully informed, uncoerced decision of two people who knew exactly what they had almost lost and knew exactly what they had found. That was enough. That was everything.